This is a 2005 Ford Taurus SE, a 3-liter overhead valve engine, and it has a problem growling in the front end, just like a buzzing noise, and likely this passenger side wheel bearing is bad. And just simply by pushing on the wheel, you can feel a little looseness to it, as opposed to pushing the other side is fine. So I want to put a wheel bearing in it. I've jacked the car up so that the wheel's off the ground, set it on a jack stand. I'm going to start by removing the 19mm lug nuts from the wheel and removing the wheel. I've turned the steering wheel as if you're pulling out to the right. I'm going to remove these two 15mm hanger bolts for the brake caliper, and look in there at your pads and make sure you got some meat on them, otherwise you'll be taking these 12mm off too to change the pads. Hang your caliper and hanger assembly from a bungee cord or wire or whatever, as long as it's not pulling on this brake hose. I'm down to the wheel bearing hub assembly. I can feel the roughness in this, so any further testing is not going to be necessary. I've put the car in neutral, and that allows you to spin this, and you can also take the wheel off the ground on the other side. But it should be a nice smooth. It just feels like gear teeth when you're rotating it by hand. No bolts are bad inside of the bearing races, and that roughness is what you hear, like a buzzing noise out on this side. But it could have been the other side. Sometimes it's tricky to find out which one. You just kind of have to spin them by hand, and the one that's rough, it'll be it. I went ahead and sprayed some penetrating oil around the wheel bearing mounting, like a triangle piece of steel, and then the wheel bearing bolts are sticking through it. And I sprayed some penetrating oil on the ABS sensor and took the ABS sensor bolt out. It's not absolutely necessary to remove the ABS sensor, it's just handy to risk tearing it up. E8 socket. It's like a reverse Torx bit, an inverted Torx bit. You could probably get a 1/4" 6-point on that, and spray the inside of the sensor down where it's pointing at the teeth on the drive axle and the outside of it. Take the bolt out and work it side to side first and get it loose. If it's stuck, just leave it. Because it will break off if it's galled in there. But get it moving side to side first, and I'll just stick it up out of the way. Now that this is all lubed up, I'm going to take this axle nut off. It takes a 30mm. I used an impact on it, but you could put a bar in on these studs and maybe stick a couple lug nuts on it and wedge it to get it loose. This nut is actually supposed to be replaced, but we'll work around that. And there's a washer back in here. And remove this 18mm nut off the tie rod end. If you've got a Carter pin, take it out. This one's missing it, but we'll get one before it gets put back together. And install something like a pitman arm puller onto the spindle and pop the tie rod end out. And now's the perfect time to check your tie rod ends for looseness too, the inner one, any of them. Next step, we'll take a little coordination. Take a center drift punch and put it in the center of the axle and dislodge it, knock it back a little bit. Give the axle a little something, a little extra clearance. Break the lower ball joint nut loose. That's also a self-locking nut with a neoprene head on it, and should be replaced with a new nut from Ford that hasn't been installed yet, although some Loctite might serve in its place. I've taken the nut down till it's just flush with the stud. And once you get your nut loosened up, pull this brake dust shield back and slide this pitman arm puller back in line with it and zap it down. Well, it did take a little bit of heat to get that one loose. The ball joint's kind of loose in it anyway, but it wasn't anything a propane tank couldn't take care of. It really stuck on there. Go ahead and stick a pry bar or whatever in the lower control arm and pry it down. And ease your spindle out of the lower ball joint hole. And then just don't overstretch your axle. Once you get it out of there, take a light hammer and tap this axle out of the way if it's stuck a little bit. Not bad enough to mushroom the head on it. Just push it back out of the way. Be sure not to damage these teeth on the ABS ring, or you won't be happy about that. Okay, got the axle out of the way to get into these bolts for the wheel bearing. 3 of them for 15 millimeters. Just be sure not to damage your ABS ring there. If any of the teeth gets dented, it's going to have a problem. Okay, I've took these 3 wheel bearing bolts out. They're supposed to be replaced with new ones, and what will transpire is to take a wire drill brush and grind the blue Loctite off of them, and then we'll put another layer on it. Right now I'm going to take a sledgehammer, beat this wheel bearing out of there, hopefully without incident. I'm probably trying to brace the spindle a little bit while I'm hitting on it, tapping around on it. Oh man, this is kind of the sound it was making when it was running. Rougher than a cob. Just feel the roughness to it. Spray a little penetrating oil around it again. It's going to put up a fight coming out of there. And it's starting to move along. This is rattling this chain. Like that. Just watch your kneecaps. That's nice. Clean that out with some brake cleaner and take a wire drill brush and clean all the gristle from around that hole and scrape any excess scale from the mounting surface of the bearing with a scraper, something that won't damage the aluminum, especially around these ear holes. I've got all the corrosion ground down on the wheel bearing insert. Anything sticking up anyway. I'm going to line it with some silicone grease to slow the corrosion down on the inside. It's pretty clear, but it's on there good. Now I'm going to take the drill brush and grind all this blue Loctite off of the bolts. And the wheel bearing is somewhat directional, where it lines up one way and not the other. So keep an eye on that. Get all the Loctite cleaned off the bolts, 99% of it. And we'll put a fresh coat of Loctite on them and dab some in the wheel bearing threaded holes. And then I'm going to clean this axle off, put a light coat of grease on it. And if you're bored before you lock it down, check the fit in the drive axle. My shirt goes all the way to it. Little spots of Loctite in the bolt holes. And the ends of the bolts, about a ½ inch of them is covered with Loctite. I identified this as a top. There's two tops, I think. I'm going to mount it on there and stick the bolts in it and tighten them down to 70 foot-pounds. And I'll stage that tightening from 35 foot-pounds or so to all three of them, and then a final torque of 70 foot-pounds. Okay, that's tightened down. And check your ball joint hole for out around this, and your lower ball joint for looseness. Got the splines greased up a little bit on the drive axle. The bolts are tightened down and Loctited. I'm going to pull out on this spindle and slip the axle back into it. Let's lay it in there, and now I've got to stick a pry bar in and pry this control arm down below this stud on the lower ball joint. Really work best to turn the steering spindle back and push down on this pry bar and get my thumb in through this dust plate hole and walk the ball joint stud back in there. And the drive axle fell through. That's going to work out good, I guess. Lower ball joint, if you picked up some new nuts from Ford with the new fresh neoprene seal on them, great. Install in a continuous action to 59 foot-pounds. It'll be self-locking. If you're having to reuse the old nut, at least put some blue Loctite on these threads to make up for the self-locking crap wore off. Ball joints installed. If you took this strut pinch bolt loose for whatever reason, it torques to 85 foot-pounds and requires a new nut as well. If nothing else, blue Loctite it. You put the tie rod in it. the nut tightens to 41 foot-pounds. Give it about 30, and then turn it till the cotter pin hole lines up. One of them, there's two of them in it. Go ahead and stick the ABS sensor in it, wipe any debris off of it. It tightens down to 9 foot-pounds. Not that it really matters too much. I mean, you don't want to really tighten it down past 10, I guess. Take a drill brush and clean the inside of the rotor up where the hub sits. Remove any raised up chunks or anything, knock it loose. And I put one lug nut and mount it on the wheel bearing to make sure there's no rust falls down in behind it. Go ahead and drop the caliper with hanger down in there and put the caliper hanger bolts back in it. They tighten to 79 foot-pounds. You can add Loctite or not. Doesn't matter. There's still some on it from the factory. If you're not using a new nut, reuse the old one. Degrease the threads on the axle. And put a little blue Loctite, the last 7/16 of an inch or so. Don't forget to put your washer in behind the axle nut. Do not use an impact to install this nut. The impact action can damage the new wheel bearing inside, and you'll just be back in there changing it again in another few months. This nut tightens down to 184 foot-pounds. No more, no less. See, it really should be. Shouldn't have went on that far by hand. That's hard, but not hard enough to keep it from coming back off. Possibly. You know, blue Loctite will help slow that down some. I've stuck a chisel into the rotor to hold it. You could put a wheel on it and put some weight on it after you snugged it down first, and then do the final torque with the wheel on the ground. It's looking pretty good. Remove any junk you got in there out of the way. Make sure your cables aren't into the workings. And at the back brake plate, dust cover isn't bent into the rotor. Sounds good. All the wires are routed out of the way. And put the wheel back on it. These lug nuts tighten down to 95 foot-pounds, typical 100. I'm going to go ahead and pump the brake a few times to get a pedal. Make sure the caliper's got a hold of the rotor before I take that lug nut loose, so rust won't fall out of the fins and get behind the rotor and in front of the wheel bearing, cause it to wobble. Alright, those are down to about 100 foot-pounds. I'll go ahead and slide the jack underneath the back of the frame and let it down off of the jack stand. Take it for a little test drive.